Before the headlights cut through the rain on the Thornwood Bridge, before the child beside her stopped breathing loud enough to be heard, a voice crackled through a phone pressed against a man's ear in a house 40 miles away. She crossed the river. She has the boy with her. The man on the other end was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "My niece has made her choice. Make sure neither of them reaches morning." In the car, Seren Vale gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had gone white 2 hours ago. Beside her, a 9-year-old boy sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the darkness ahead, his mouth closed in the silence he had kept for 11 days. She didn't know that 3 miles ahead, at the edge of a territory no one entered without permission, a man who had buried his own sister 22 years ago was about to see something that would change everything. The Thornwood region existed in the margin between two worlds. On one side lay Ashford Heights, where old money families lived behind iron gates and spoke of legacy like it was a living thing that required feeding. On the other side lay Ravenmoor, a place that didn't appear on tourist maps, where a different kind of power kept order, and where the name Draven was spoken the way other places spoke of weather. As fact. As something you didn't argue with. The bridge connecting them was old. Stone and iron, built in 1911 by workers whose names no one remembered. The river beneath it ran black at night, swollen by 3 days of October rain, loud enough to swallow the sound of a car engine, loud enough to cover a scream. The forest on either side had a quality of watching. Not the way animals watched, with instinct and hunger, but the way old places watched, with memory, with patience. The trees here had seen carriages become cars, had seen bodies pulled from the river more than once, had seen women run and sometimes reach the other side, and sometimes not. Tonight the rain was the kind that didn't fall straight. It came sideways, in sheets, turning the windshield into a blur that the wipers couldn't keep up with. The road ahead was visible only in fragments, a stretch of asphalt, a guardrail, a sign that said Ravenmoor, 3 miles, the letters half obscured by rust. Seren didn't know what waited in Ravenmoor. She only knew what waited behind her. And behind her, 2 sets of headlights had just turned onto the bridge. Seren Vale was 26 years old. She had auburn hair that hadn't been washed in 4 days, pulled back with a clip she'd found in the glove compartment of a car that wasn't hers. Her eyes were the color of rain-soaked earth, and right now, they held the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. The kind that came from 11 days of running. 11 days of sleeping in the back seats of borrowed cars, in motel rooms paid for with cash, in rest stops where she kept the engine running and the doors locked, and watched every pair of headlights that passed. She had lost 9 pounds. Her clothes hung differently now. The blouse she'd worn the night she fled, a cream silk thing that had cost more than some people's rent, was wrinkled beyond recognition. She had abandoned her heels on day 2, trading them for a pair of gas station sneakers that didn't quite fit. Her hands, which had never known labor beyond signing documents, had learned in 11 days how to grip a steering wheel for 6 hours straight, how to pump gas in the rain, how to count cash in the dark and feel her stomach tighten when the number grew smaller. 11 days ago, she had been worth $47 million. Tonight, she had $312 in crumpled bills, a car she'd bought from a stranger for $2,000 in cash, and her brother. Leander sat in the passenger seat because she couldn't bear to have him behind her where she couldn't see him. He was small for 9, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that had once been full of questions. Those eyes hadn't asked anything in 11 days. His mouth hadn't opened to speak a single word since the night he had hidden behind the curtain in their grandmother's study and heard their uncle say, "The boy is a complication. If he talks, we handle him too." Leander had not talked since. Not when Seren had found him standing frozen in the hallway at midnight, his face pale as paper. Not when she had grabbed his hand and pulled him through the service entrance and into the gardener's truck. Not when they had driven for 3 hours and she had finally pulled over and held his face in her hands and begged him to tell her what he had heard. He had simply looked at her with those two old eyes and shook his head. So she had pieced it together herself. The lawyer's visit 2 weeks before. The will reading where their grandmother Elspeth, the matriarch who had built the Vale fortune from nothing, had left everything to Seren. Not to her father, not to her uncle, not to any of the cousins who had spent their lives expecting it. To Seren, the quiet one. The one who had sat with Elspeth every Sunday afternoon and listened to her stories. The one who had never asked for anything. $47 million. The estate in Ashford Heights. Controlling shares in 3 companies. The art collection. The land. All of it had gone to a 26-year-old woman who had never wanted power and a 9-year-old boy who was now too terrified to speak. The family had contested the will, of course. But Elspeth had anticipated that. She had signed it in front of 4 witnesses, recorded a video statement, and filed copies with 3 separate law firms. The will was ironclad. So the family had chosen a different approach. Seren had found the first sign 3 days after the reading, a man in a dark coat watching her building from across the street. She had told herself it was paranoia. Then her brakes had failed on the highway, and she had barely managed to pull onto the shoulder before the car would have gone through the guardrail at 70 miles an hour. The mechanic had looked at the brake line and gone quiet. "This was cut," he said. "Clean, professional." That night she had packed a bag. 1 change of clothes for her, 2 for Leander. Her passport, though she didn't know where she would go. Cash she had withdrawn in small amounts over the previous week, some instinct telling her she might need it. And her grandmother's ring, a ruby set in old gold, the only thing she had taken from the estate. She had told no one, because there was no one to tell. Her father had stopped speaking to her the day the will was read. Her mother, Eleanor, had died when Seren was 12. Her friends, she had realized with a coldness that still shocked her, had always been her family's friends first. Acquired. Conditional. Gone the moment she became inconvenient. So she had taken Leander and driven into the night, and she had not stopped driving since. The money was running out. The car was making a sound it hadn't made yesterday, and the 2 sets of headlights behind her were gaining. Seren pressed the accelerator and felt the engine shudder. The car was a decade old, bought in a parking lot from a man who hadn't asked her name, and it had already given her more than she had any right to expect. But it was tired. She could feel it in the way the steering pulled slightly left, in the rattle beneath the hood, in the hesitation when she asked for more speed. "Hold on," she said to Leander. He didn't respond. He simply reached over and placed his small hand on her arm. A gesture so quiet, so deliberate, that it nearly broke her. This child had not spoken in 11 days, but he was telling her something now. "I'm here. I trust you. Don't give up." Seren blinked hard and focused on the road. The sign emerged from the rain like a ghost. Ravenmoor, 1 mile. She didn't know what Ravenmoor was. She had heard the name only once, from her grandmother, years ago. "There are places," Elspeth had said, "where the old rules don't apply, where a different kind of law keeps order. If you ever need to disappear, go where the powerful are afraid to follow." Seren had thought it was a metaphor, a story, one of Elspeth's many riddles wrapped in lessons. But now, with headlights filling her rearview mirror and her brother's hand on her arm and $300 standing between her and oblivion, she understood. Her grandmother had been giving her a map. The Ravenmoor sign passed in a blur of rust and rain, and somewhere ahead, in a house that sat on a hill overlooking the river, a man named Cormac Draven set down his glass and looked out the window at the headlights coming down the old bridge road. 3 vehicles, the first one fleeing, the second two hunting. He had seen this before, 22 years ago, on a night just like this, with rain just like this. He had watched from a window and done nothing because he was 16 and powerless, and his sister had paid the price. He was not 16 anymore, and he was not powerless. The first bullet hit the rear window and turned it into a spiderweb of cracks. Seren screamed. Leander didn't. He simply ducked forward, his small body curling toward the dashboard, his hands covering his ears, his eyes squeezed shut. Not in panic, in practice. Like a child who had learned what to do when the world became too loud. Stay down, Seren gasped. Stay down, stay down, stay down. She pressed the accelerator to the floor. The engine screamed in protest, a sound like something tearing, and for 3 seconds the car surged forward. Then something in the machinery gave way. The check engine light, which had been glowing amber for 2 days, turned red. The car began to slow. No, 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 no. She looked in the rearview mirror. The two vehicles behind her were close now, close enough that she could see the shape of men in the front seats, close enough that she could see the arm extending from the passenger window of the lead car, holding something dark and angular. Another shot. This one hit the trunk. Leander. Her voice cracked. Leander, I need you to get on the floor. Can you do that? Can you get down on the floor? He looked at her. Those eyes that had once asked 1,000 questions a day, that had once sparkled when she read him stories, that had once belonged to a normal boy with a normal life. Those eyes were calm. Too calm. The calm of a child who had already accepted that the world was not safe. He nodded once and slid off the seat onto the floor of the passenger side, making himself as small as possible. Seren's heart was shattering and there was no time to feel it. The road curved ahead. A sharp turn she couldn't see beyond. The car was losing speed. 40 miles an hour. 35. The vehicles behind her were seconds away. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of the last Sunday they had spent together, drinking tea in the garden, watching the birds. Elspeth had taken her hand and said, "You have something they will never have, Seren. You have a heart that doesn't calculate. That's why I'm giving you everything. Because you're the only one who won't let it make you cruel." She had failed. She had taken everything and it had made her a target, and now Leander was curled on the floor of a dying car and she couldn't save him. The curve came. She took it too fast, felt the tires slip on the wet asphalt, felt the car begin to spin. The world became a blur of rain and darkness and headlights. She heard herself scream again. She heard the crunch of metal against something solid. And then the car stopped moving. Steam rose from the hood. The windshield had cracked, but the engine was still running. Barely. Seren turned. Leander. Leander, are you okay? He was still on the floor, still curled, still silent. But he lifted his head and looked at her, and he nodded. The pursuing vehicles came around the curve, and stopped. Both of them. At the same moment. As if they had hit an invisible wall. Seren didn't understand. She looked through the cracked windshield and saw why. 3 SUVs were parked across the road ahead. Black. Unmarked. Their headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights. And standing in front of them, illuminated in the glare, were 7 men with weapons drawn. Not pointed at her. Pointed at the vehicles behind her. One of the men stepped forward. He raised a hand. A single gesture. And the 2 pursuing cars began to reverse. Seren watched them retreat into the darkness until their headlights disappeared around the curve. Then the man who had raised his hand turned and walked toward her car. His name was spoken in Ashford Heights, the way old families spoke of scandal. Quietly, with a glance over the shoulder, with the understanding that some things were better left unacknowledged. Cormac Draven. He had built Ravenmore into what it was over 20 years. Not through inheritance, not through luck. through a kind of patience that most men didn't possess, and a capacity for violence that most men couldn't imagine. He controlled the territory between the river and the northern hills. He employed over 300 people, though employed was a word that meant different things in different contexts. He had arrangements with judges, understandings with police captains, and a reputation that made powerful men hesitate before saying his name aloud. There were stories. There were always stories about men like him. That he had once killed a man with his hands in full view of a crowded restaurant and walked out without anyone calling the police. That he had bankrupted a rival family by buying their debts and calling them due on Christmas Eve. That he had a room in his house where men went in and didn't come out, and that the river had carried more than one body past the Thornwood Bridge. Some of the stories were true, some were exaggerated. Cormac had never corrected any of them. A reputation was a tool, and he had learned long ago that the most effective tools were the ones you didn't have to use. He was 38 years old, tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that had begun to silver at the temples, and eyes the color of a winter lake. His face was not handsome in the way that invited warmth. It was handsome in the way that warned you. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from something harder than bone, a mouth that rarely smiled and never without reason. He had been watching the bridge from his study when the 3 sets of headlights appeared. He had seen this pattern before. The geometry of pursuit. 1 vehicle fleeing, 2 hunting. And something in his chest, something he kept walled behind years of discipline, had recognized it. He had made 1 phone call. 30 seconds. Block the road past the curve. Let the first vehicle through. Stop the other 2. His man had asked no questions. That was why Cormac kept him. Now Cormac himself stood in the rain, watching his lieutenant walk toward the crashed car. He could see through the cracked windshield. A woman behind the wheel. Auburn hair. Eyes wide with terror and something else. Something harder. Defiance, maybe. Or the kind of resignation that came from having nothing left to lose. And in the passenger seat, curled low, a child. A child. Cormac felt the wall inside him shift, crack, threaten to open. He had not thought about his sister in 3 years. He had trained himself not to. But looking at that car, at that woman, at that child, he couldn't stop the memory from rising. Mira, 16 years old. Running. Not fast enough. She had been 16. Cormac had been 16 too. Twins, born 4 minutes apart. Her first, him second. She had never let him forget those 4 minutes. I'm the older one, she would say, grinning. I'm in charge. Mira had been light where Cormac was shadow, quick to laugh, quick to trust, quick to believe the best in people who didn't deserve it. Their father had been a man of modest power in Ravenmoor, a man who ran numbers and collected debts and stayed small enough to avoid attention. He had enemies, but not dangerous ones. Or so they had believed. The men who came for Mira hadn't come for her. They had come for leverage. Their father owed a debt he couldn't pay to a family from the Eastern Territories, and they had decided to collect in flesh. Cormac remembered every detail of that night. He remembered standing at the window of their small house, watching 3 cars pull up. He remembered his mother's scream. He remembered his father pushing him into a closet and saying, "Stay here. Stay quiet, no matter what." He had stayed. He had stayed quiet. And through the slats of the closet door he had watched them drag Mira out by her hair while she screamed his name. Cormac. Cormac. Cormac, help me. He had been 16 years old and frozen with fear, and he had done nothing. They found her body 3 days later. The river had carried her downstream to a place where the current slowed. The coroner's report used words that Cormac had never been able to forget. Words that had carved themselves into the walls of his mind and stayed there, rotting, festering, and turning into something that looked like purpose. His mother had died 6 months later. Not from violence, from absence. She had simply stopped eating, stopped speaking, and stopped getting out of bed. The doctors called it depression. Cormac called it what it was. His mother had died because her daughter had been taken and her son had hidden in a closet and done nothing. His father had lasted another year, then a bottle, then a gun. Cormac had been 18 when he buried the last of his family, alone, in a cemetery on the hill where the rain fell sideways and no one came to pay respects. That was when he had made the promise. Not to God. He didn't believe in God anymore. Not to his parents. They were beyond hearing. He had made the promise to himself, standing in the rain beside 3 graves, his hands clenched at his sides. No one else. Never again. If I ever have the power to stop this, I will not look away. He had spent 20 years building that power, becoming the thing that other men feared, creating a territory where his word was law and his protection was absolute. He had told himself it was business, strategy, survival. But underneath all of it, underneath the money and the violence and the reputation, there was still a 16-year-old boy standing at a window, watching his sister being dragged away and screaming inside a body that wouldn't move. Now he stood in the rain on a road in Ravenmoor, looking at a car with a cracked windshield, and inside that car was a woman who was running and a child who was hiding, and the men who had been hunting them had retreated at the sight of his name. His lieutenant approached. "Boss, the woman. She's injured. The kid looks okay, but he won't talk." Won't talk. Cormac thought of Mira's voice screaming his name. He thought of all the words his mother had stopped saying. He thought of silence as a wound that never healed. "Bring them to the house," he said. His lieutenant hesitated. "Sir, we don't know who they are. The men pursuing them. They had professional equipment. This isn't some domestic dispute. Someone with resources wants her dead." "I know. If we get involved, we're already involved." Cormac turned and walked back toward the lead SUV. The rain fell against his coat. The night pressed in from all sides. And somewhere inside him, the wall that had held for 22 years began, at last, to crumble. The house on the hill was not what Seren had expected. She had imagined something cold, stone and iron, like a fortress. Instead, as the SUV pulled through the gates, she saw warmth. Golden light spilling from tall windows. Ivy climbing the walls in patterns that suggested decades of growth. A garden, even in October, still holding the last of its color. It looked like a home. That was what unsettled her most. They brought her through a side entrance, not the front. A woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes met them in the hallway. She looked at Seren, then at Leander, then at the blood on Seren's forehead from where it had struck the steering wheel. "This way," the woman said. No questions, no judgment, just direction. They were taken to a room with a fireplace already lit, 2 armchairs, a sofa with blankets folded over the arm, a tray on the table with tea and sandwiches, as if someone had known they were coming and known they would be hungry. Leander sat on the sofa and stared at the fire. He hadn't looked at Seren since they'd left the car. She didn't know if that was shock or something else. Something deeper. The door opened. Cormac Draven entered the room the way weather enters a valley, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a presence that changed the pressure of the air. He was taller than she had realized. His coat was wet from the rain, and he removed it slowly, handing it to someone behind him without looking. Then he looked at her. Seren stood. She didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had kept her alive for 11 days. "Sit," he said. His voice was low, controlled, with an accent she couldn't quite place. "You're safe here. You don't need to stand." "I don't know that." "No, you don't." He moved to the armchair across from her and sat. "But the men who were hunting you are gone. They won't come back tonight." And if they come back tomorrow, they'll find the same answer waiting for them. Why? Why what? Why did you stop them? You don't know me. You don't know what I've done or what I'm running from. For all you know, I deserve what's coming. Cormac studied her face. The firelight caught the angles of his features, softening nothing. Do you? No. Then that's enough for tonight. He reached for the teapot and poured 2 cups. He set one on the table near her, then held the other without drinking. Your brother hasn't spoken, he said. Seren glanced at Leander. He was still watching the fire. He hasn't spoken in 11 days. He heard something. Something about what my family plans to do to me. He hasn't said a word since. What does your family plan to do? Kill me. Take back what my grandmother left me. She paused. They've already tried twice. Cormac nodded slowly. Not surprised. Not shocked. Just absorbing information the way a man absorbs information when violence is familiar to him. Your family, he said. Who are they? The Vales. Ashford Heights. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Old money. Connected. They have judges in their pocket. Police captains who owe them favors. Yes. Which means you can't run forever. Eventually they'll find you. Eventually the law will side with them because the law was built to side with people like them. Seren felt the truth of it settle into her chest like a stone. I know. Cormac set his tea down. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on hers. There is a way, he said, to make you untouchable, to make your brother untouchable, to take you out of their reach permanently. How? Marry me. The word landed in the room like a dropped blade. Seren stared at him. What? Marriage. Legal, binding, public. The moment you become my wife, you become part of my family. My name, my protection. The Vales have power in their world, but their world ends where mine begins. And in my world, no one touches what's mine. You don't even know me. I know enough. I could be lying. I could be manipulating you. I could be everything they say I am. Cormac's mouth moved. Not a smile, not quite, but something close. You're sitting in my house with blood on your face and a silent child beside you and $300 to your name. If this is manipulation, it's the worst I've ever seen. Seren looked at Leander. He had turned from the fire. He was watching her now. Watching with those eyes that had seen too much, that had stopped asking questions, that had learned silence as a form of survival. What do you want in return? She asked. Nothing. No one offers something for nothing. Cormac was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 22 years ago, men came for my sister. I was 16. I hid. I did nothing. She died because I was too afraid to move. He paused. I've spent every day since building the kind of power that means I never have to hide again. But power is meaningless if you don't use it. So no, I don't want anything from you. I want something for myself. I want to be the man who didn't look away. Seren felt something shift inside her. A wall she hadn't known she'd built. Okay, she whispered. Okay? I'll marry you. They were married 3 days later. Not in a church. Not with flowers or music or a white dress. In Cormac's study, with a judge who owed him 17 years of favors and 2 witnesses whose names Seren never learned. She wore a simple gray dress that the housekeeper, whose name was Brenna, had found for her. Cormac wore a dark suit. Leander sat in a chair by the window and watched without expression. The ceremony took 4 minutes. The judge pronounced them married. Cormac signed the certificate. Seren signed beside him, her hand steady even though her heart was not. And just like that, she became Seren Draven. That night, after Leander had been put to bed in a room with a lock on the inside and a window that looked out over the garden, Seren sat with Cormac in the study and told him everything. She told him about her grandmother Elspeth. How the old woman had built the Vial fortune from nothing, starting with a single textile mill in 1952 and expanding into shipping, real estate, manufacturing. How she had married a man who turned out to be weak, and raised children who turned out to be cruel, and watched her empire become a nest of vipers wearing silk. She told him about the will, how Elspeth had called her to the estate 3 weeks before she died and said, "I'm leaving it all to you, Seren, not because you want it, because you don't. That's how I know you won't let it poison you." She told him about the reading, the looks on her father's face, her uncle's face, the cousins who had already spent their inheritance in their minds, the silence that followed the lawyer's voice, and then the shouting, and then the threats that came wrapped in legal language, but meant something much simpler. She told him about the man watching her building, the cut brake line, the night she found her apartment door unlocked and nothing taken, but everything moved slightly, as if someone had been inside just to prove they could. She told him about Leander, how he had been staying with her that week because their father was traveling and their stepmother didn't want to be bothered. How he had been playing in the study when the family meeting convened, hidden behind the curtain, invisible and forgotten. How he had heard their uncle say, "The boy is a complication. If he talks, we handle him too." Cormac listened without interrupting. His face gave nothing away, but his hands, resting on the arms of his chair, had slowly curled into fists. When she finished, the room was silent except for the fire. "There's something else," Seren said. "Something I only realized 3 days ago." "Tell me." "My mother, Eleanor. She died when I was 12. They said it was an accident, a car crash on a mountain road. But last week, before I left, I found a letter in my grandmother's things, hidden in a book she knew I would take." She paused. The letter was from a private investigator. He'd been looking into my mother's death for years, on my grandmother's orders. The brake line on her car had been cut, the same way they tried to kill me. Cormac's jaw tightened. "My grandmother knew," Seren continued. "She knew my mother was murdered. She knew who did it. And she couldn't prove it, not in a way the courts would accept. So she did the only thing she could. She took everything from them. Everything they thought was theirs. And she gave it to me." "The will wasn't just inheritance," Cormac said quietly. "It was revenge." "Yes. And they're willing to kill me to undo it." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. "Your uncle," Cormac said. "The one who gave the order about Leander. What's his name?" "Roderick. Roderick Vial." "And your father?" "Aldrich." Cormac nodded slowly. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. "There's something you need to understand about me," he said, his back to her. "I am not a good man. I've done things that would keep you awake at night if I told you. I've built my world on fear and violence and the understanding that certain debts must be paid in blood. I'm telling you this not to frighten you, but so you know what you've married. So you understand what I'm capable of." He turned. "Your family has hunted you for 11 days. They've tried to kill you twice. They murdered your mother. They've traumatized a child into silence. And they will not stop. Not because of laws. Not because of morality. They'll stop when they're made to stop." "What are you going to do?" Cormac's eyes were steady, cold, and behind the cold, something that burned. "I'm going to make them stop." It began quietly. On the 4th day after the wedding, Aldrich Vial woke to discover that his bank accounts had been frozen. Not by the police, not by any legal authority, simply frozen. His calls to the bank were met with confusion, then silence, then a dial tone. On the 5th day, Roderick Vial's business partner of 15 years announced without warning that he was dissolving their arrangement. He offered no explanation. He simply walked out of a meeting in the middle of a sentence and never returned. On the 6th day, The Vile family attorney, a man who had served them for 3 decades, sent a letter resigning his representation. The letter contained a single paragraph and no forwarding address. On the 7th day, the first arrest was made. It was not for murder. It was not for the attempts on Seren's life. It was for tax fraud, a paper trail that had been buried for 12 years and suddenly, inexplicably, surfaced on the desk of a federal prosecutor. Roderick Vile was taken from his home at 6 in the morning, in handcuffs, in front of his neighbors. The family scrambled. They called their contacts. They reached for the levers of power they had always relied on. But the levers didn't move. The contacts didn't answer. It was as if a wall had been built around them overnight. Invisible, but absolute. Aldrich Vale tried to reach a judge he had known for 20 years. The judge's secretary said he was unavailable. He tried to reach a police captain who had taken his money for a decade. The captain had retired, effective immediately, and left no forwarding information. On the 10th day, the evidence of Eleanor Vale's murder was delivered to the district attorney's office. Not the original evidence, which had been buried and destroyed years ago. New evidence. Photographs that had never been seen. Testimony from witnesses who had been silent for 12 years and suddenly found their voices. A paper trail connecting Aldrich Vale to a mechanic who specialized in making accidents happen. The mechanic himself had been located in a town 300 miles away, living under a different name. He was persuaded to provide a detailed statement. The nature of the persuasion was not specified. The arrest warrant was issued on day 11. Aldrich Vile was not at home when the police came. He had fled 2 days earlier, perhaps sensing what was coming, perhaps hoping to reach a country without extradition. He made it as far as a private airfield 40 miles from the city. Cormac's men were waiting. They didn't hurt him. That was not the instruction. They simply delayed him. A problem with the fuel. A question about the flight plan. Small obstacles that multiplied until the police arrived. Seren watched the arrest on the news. She sat in the living room of the house on the hill, Leander beside her, and watched her father being led to a police car in handcuffs. His face was gray, his eyes were wild. He looked like a man who had spent his entire life believing he was untouchable, and had just discovered how wrong he had been. Cormac entered the room and stood behind the sofa. He didn't speak. He simply watched with her. "Is it over?" Seren asked. "The arrests are just the beginning. The trials will take months. But the outcome isn't in doubt. The evidence is overwhelming. Your uncle will spend the rest of his life in prison. Your father will likely die there. And the others? The cousins? Scattered. Their assets are frozen. Their names are toxic. No one in Ashford Heights will acknowledge them. They're finished." Seren turned off the television. The screen went dark, reflecting her face back at her. "I thought I would feel something," she said quietly. "Satisfaction. Relief. Something." "What do you feel?" She considered the question. "Empty. Like I've been holding my breath for so long that I don't remember how to breathe normally." Cormac walked around the sofa and sat beside her. Not close, not touching, but present. "That feeling will pass," he said. "The emptiness. It's what's left when the fear leaves. It takes time for something else to grow in its place." "What grew in yours? After your sister? After your parents?" Cormac was quiet for a long moment. "Anger, first. Then purpose. Then something I didn't expect." "What?" "Patience. The understanding that revenge isn't a single act. It's a construction. You build it piece by piece, year by year, until the people who hurt you wake up one day and realize that everything they thought was theirs is gone, and they never even saw it coming." Seren looked at him. "Is that what you did? To the men who took your sister?" "Yes." "How long did it take?" 11 years. The number hung in the air. 11 years. The same number of days she had run. "They're all dead now. Cormac said. Every one of them. Some in prison, some in accidents. Some simply disappeared. I didn't rush it. I didn't need to. Patience is its own kind of violence. Seren should have been frightened. She knew that. She was sitting beside a man who had just described an 11-year campaign of systematic destruction, delivered in the same tone another man might use to describe a business strategy. But she wasn't frightened. She was, for the first time in 11 days, not afraid. The changes began slowly. On the second week, Brenna brought Seren to a room on the east side of the house. It was large, with windows that faced the morning sun, and it had been prepared for her. Not decorated in a generic way, but considered. Books on the shelves that matched the titles she had mentioned in passing. A writing desk positioned near the best light. Fresh flowers in a vase by the window, the kind her grandmother used to grow. Mr. Draven asked what you might like. Brenna said. I hope I got it right. Seren stood in the doorway and didn't speak for a long moment. She had spent 26 years in a family that had never once asked what she liked. Her father had chosen her schools, her activities, and her future. Her preferences had always been inconveniences to be managed. This room had been built around her preferences, around her. It's perfect, she whispered. The clothes came next, not forced on her, offered. A wardrobe that appeared in her closet over the course of a week, each piece selected with care. Soft fabrics, colors she loved, nothing ostentatious, nothing designed to display wealth, just beautiful things, chosen for her comfort. Cormac never mentioned them. He never asked if she liked them. He never demanded gratitude. They simply appeared, and when she wore them, he looked at her the way a man looks at something he finds beautiful, but knows he doesn't own. The staff treated her with deference. Not fear, the way they treated Cormac. Respect. They called her Mrs. Draven. They asked her opinions on household matters. They looked at her when she spoke and listened to what she said. It was such a simple thing, being listened to. She had forgotten how it felt. Leander began to heal too. Not his voice, not yet, but something else. His body relaxed. He stopped flinching at sudden sounds. He started to sleep through the night. He began to draw again. Pictures that were dark at first, full of shadows and sharp angles, but gradually lighter. Gardens, the view from his window, Brenna's cat. One evening, 3 weeks after the wedding, Seren was sitting in the study reading when Cormac entered. He paused at the door. Am I interrupting? She shook her head. He walked to the chair across from her and sat. And for a few minutes they simply existed in the same space, not speaking, not needing to. Then Seren set down her book. Her eyes were wet. What is it? Cormac asked. I keep waiting, she said. For the cost, for the condition, for the moment when you tell me what you really want, for the trap to close. There is no trap. There's always a trap. There's always something. I spent my whole life learning that. Every kindness had a price. Every gift came with a leash. Cormac leaned forward. His voice was soft, softer than she had ever heard it. Seren, look at me. She did. I have done terrible things. I will do terrible things again. I am not offering you a good man. But I am offering you this. I will never lie to you. I will never trap you. And I will never, for as long as I live, let anyone hurt you again. The tears spilled over. She didn't wipe them away. I don't know how to trust that. I know. So don't trust it. Test it. Every day. For as long as you need. And I will prove it. Every day. For as long as it takes. Seren closed her eyes, and for the first time since the night she had fled her apartment with her brother in her arms, she let herself weep. Not from fear, not from desperation, from relief. from the terrifying, fragile hope that maybe, finally, she was safe. The trials lasted 4 months. Seren did not attend. Cormac's lawyers advised against it, and she agreed. She had no desire to see her father's face again, to sit in a courtroom and be scrutinized, and to become a spectacle. So she stayed at the house on the hill and followed the proceedings through reports delivered each evening. Roderick Vale was convicted first: conspiracy to commit murder, tax fraud, witness tampering. The judge sentenced him to 43 years. He would die in prison. Aldrich Vale's trial was longer, more complex. The evidence against him was overwhelming, but his lawyers fought every point, every document, and every witness. In the end, it didn't matter. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned with guilty verdicts on all counts. Life without parole. Seren read the verdict in the study, Cormac beside her. She set down the paper and stared at the fire. "My grandmother would have wanted to see this," she said. "She saw it. She planned it. She just didn't live long enough to watch it happen." Seren smiled, small and sad. She always said patience was the most underrated virtue. The estate in Ashford Heights was returned to her control. The family's challenges to the will collapsed once the convictions were announced. No judge would rule in favor of convicted murderers. The fortune, the companies, the land, all of it was hers now. Legally. Permanently. She hired a new attorney, a woman Cormac had recommended to manage the transition. She sold the house in Ashford Heights. She couldn't bear to live in it. Couldn't bear to walk the halls where her family had plotted her death. The money from the sale went to a fund for survivors of domestic violence and family abuse. Her grandmother would have approved the companies she kept. Not to run, not directly, but to redirect. She appointed new boards, new leadership, and people chosen for competence and integrity rather than blood. The textile mills that had started the Vale fortune began paying living wages for the first time in their history. The shipping company implemented safety standards that should have existed decades ago. It was not redemption. Nothing could redeem what her family had done, what they had been. But it was something. A turning. A beginning. Leander spoke on a Tuesday in March. Seren was sitting with him in the garden, watching Brenna Sakuranen's cat chase a butterfly, when he turned to her and said, "Seren." Just her name. One word. His voice was rough from months of silence, barely above a whisper. She stared at him. Her heart stopped. "Seren," he said again. "I'm hungry." She grabbed him so hard she nearly knocked him off the bench. She held him and cried and laughed and cried again. And Leander, for the first time in 5 months, laughed too. That night, at dinner, Leander sat at the table and asked for seconds. He asked Brenna about her cat. He asked Cormac if the garden had always had so many birds. Cormac answered every question with patience, with attention, with the careful focus of a man who understood what it meant to find your voice after losing it. Later, after Leander had gone to bed, Seren found Cormac in the study. "Thank you," she said. He looked up from his papers. "For what?" "For this. For all of it. For giving him a place where he felt safe enough to speak again." Cormac set down his pen. "I didn't give him anything. You did. You protected him. You ran when running was the only option. You didn't give up." He spoke again because he knew, finally, that the danger was over. And he knew that because of you. Seren walked to his chair. She stood before him for a moment, looking down at this man who had married a stranger in a gray dress, who had dismantled a powerful family without hesitation, who had given her a room filled with books she loved and never once asked for anything in return. She leaned down and kissed him. It was not a long kiss, not passionate, just soft and deliberate and real. When she pulled back, Cormac looked at her with something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Surprise. And beneath it, something warmer. "What was that for?" he asked, for not looking away. 1 year later, on a clear October morning, Seren drove across the Thornwood Bridge. The road was the same. The river below was the same, though calmer now, reflecting the blue sky rather than swallowing the rain. The trees on either side had shed their leaves, gold and amber scattered across the asphalt like offerings. She was not fleeing this time. She was not afraid. Beside her, Leander sat with a book open in his lap, though he wasn't reading. He was watching the road, the trees, the bridge that had once been a threshold between terror and unknown salvation. "This is where they stopped chasing us," he said. "Yes. And those men, Mr. Draven's men, they were waiting." "Yes." Leander was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I used to have nightmares about this bridge, about what would have happened if they hadn't been there." Seren glanced at him. "Do you still have them?" "No, not for a while now." He paused. "Now I dream about the garden, and Brennan's cat, and sometimes about grandmother's house. But the good parts, the Sunday afternoons." Seren smiled. "She would be proud of you. She would be proud of you too." They drove in silence for a few miles, past the Ravenmoor sign, past the curve where the car had crashed, past the place where Seren had sat behind the wheel with $300 and no hope, and watched her world end and begin in the same moment. Their destination was a cemetery on a hill outside the city, small, quiet, surrounded by old trees that had been there for a century. Elspeth Vale was buried there, in a plot she had chosen herself, beside her own mother and grandmother. Seren parked the car and walked with Leander to the grave. The headstone was simple, gray granite, her grandmother's name, the dates of her birth and death, and below them, and 3 words she had requested. She did not yield. Seren knelt and placed a bundle of flowers against the stone. White roses, her grandmother's favorite. "I did what you asked," she said quietly. "I kept the fortune. I kept Leander safe. I didn't let them win." The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere above, a bird called. "I'm married now," Seren continued. "To a man you would have liked, I think. He's not gentle. He's not soft. But he's honest. And he protects what he loves. Like you did." Leander stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "I miss you," Seren whispered. "I wish you could see what we've built. What we're building." She stayed there for a long time, kneeling in the grass, feeling the sun on her back, and the weight of the year behind her, and the lightness of the year ahead. When she finally stood, Cormac was there. He had come in a second car, parking at the edge of the cemetery and walking up the hill to stand at a distance, waiting. Not intruding. Just present. Seren walked to him. Leander followed. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I wanted to." She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. They stood together at the top of the hill, looking out over the valley. The river wound through the trees below, silver in the morning light. The bridge was visible in the distance, a small gray line connecting 2 worlds. "Do you ever think about that night?" Seren asked. "Yes." "What do you think about?" Cormac was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think about what would have happened if I hadn't been looking out the window, if I had gone to bed early, if I had decided it wasn't my concern. But you didn't." "No." "Why?" He looked at her. The morning light caught his eyes, softening them, revealing the warmth that lived behind the cold. "Because some promises you make when you're 16 years old, standing in the rain beside 3 graves, and you spend the rest of your life trying to keep them." Seren leaned her head against his shoulder. Leander stood on her other side, his hand still in hers. The three of them looked out at the valley, at the river, at the bridge that had once been a place of terror, and was now just a road. Just stone and iron and the memory of rain. Behind them, the headstone stood watch. She did not yield, and neither had they.